in the America I grew up in, and maybe the America you grew up in too, we wouldn't have had to discuss things like I'm going to be discussing with my special guest today. We didn't have to talk about uncomfortable things. We didn't have to worry about these things. But increasingly, it seems like we do have to think about them and discuss them. And rather than worry about them, I would much rather you develop a plan to deal with what may be coming just around the corner. I've got the great pleasure today of chatting with Ms. Tracy Thurman. Welcome, Tracy. It's a pleasure to have you.
It's wonderful to be here with you today, Dr. Berry.
I saw your recent interview with my friend Chris Martinson on his Peak Prosperity YouTube channel and immediately started reaching out to you because I think your message and what you're fighting for and fighting against is very, very important. And I think every American needs to be aware of what's going on in the background and develop a plan. That's my middle name, is develop a plan. I'm not a worrier. I'm not a fretter. I'm not a gossiper. I'm like, okay, here's a problem. Here, what are we going to do about it? And I love that your articles on your Substack, you either start with that or you get to that very quickly. Here's what you can do about this. So we're going to be discussing several uncomfortable topics today. And I hope people will share this and start to develop not only a personal plan, but a family plan, a community plan, a citywide plan, a countywide plan, because if we don't start planning for this stuff now, I'm afraid it's going to become very uncomfortable in the near future. Before we get started, tell people a little bit about you and how you came to be part of this fight.
Sure. So I was just a normie American for, my childhood, most of my life. And when I was 20, I was told by my doctor to take a vaccine that she told me would prevent me from getting cancer. And obviously, no doctor would ever lie to you about anything or tell you something that's not true. And so it didn't occur to me I should question them. I took the vaccine. It was 3 doses. It was the Gardasil vaccine.
Ah.
And with every dose, I got sicker and sicker and sicker. But it didn't occur to me even at that time that it could be the vaccine doing that, because of course vaccines are safe and effective. They never cause problems like that. And by the end of the 3rd dose, the beginning of this all, I was working full time. My career was off to a great start. And by the end of the 3rd dose, I was hospitalized. I could not stand up without my heart stopping. I would go asystolic within a few minutes of standing. I could not maintain blood pressure. They even put in a pacemaker and then removed it because your heart beating empty isn't helpful. And was sleeping about 18 hours a day. I had horrific brain fog. I was totally and permanently disabled as far as the government was concerned. So my student loans were written off, everything. I was written off as being not useful in any way to society ever again. Yeah. Good luck with whatever you're going to do with your life.
This was the HPV vaccine.
That's correct.
And your doctor promoted that to you as, hey, this is going to protect you from cervical cancer later in life.
Not even cervical cancer, just getting cancer.
Cancer in general. And I'm assuming that your doctor did not discuss with you something that I think is very important. It's called informed consent, which means not only do you tout the benefits of a pill, an injection, a vaccination, but you also talk about the possible known side effects. And did you have that conversation or not really?
None whatsoever. I had no idea that there could possibly be any side effects at all. And even after I was sick and started to occur that maybe this was responsible, I was gaslit and told that there was no way that this injury I had experienced could possibly be from the vaccine, because that doesn't happen. And so the first real confirmation I had was when that paper came out. I believe it was from Japan, showing about that hundreds of thousands of young girls had potentially had this exact same disease develop. And at that point, I knew, I was one of them. And I was also now outside the 3-year window and could never recover financially anything for the injury I had suffered.
Now, you're obviously not disabled now. You would be, no. I'm assuming you developed POTS is what you...
a very severe form of POTS.
Yeah. And so, but you're sitting upright now. You're able to carry on a conversation. How did you get better? How did that happen?
Well, it was way more than a decade that I was like this. So it's not like I just was naturally recovering. I was sick for far, far longer than a decade. And a friend eventually suggested to me that I should try taking raw milk. That raw milk might um, give me some improvement to my symptoms. And I was extremely skeptical. I bought the anti raw milk propaganda that raw milk is dangerous, will cause you to develop terrible illnesses. I bought it all. But if you had told me to chop off part of one of my legs and that might heal me, I would have considered it because I was desperate to get some form of a life back. And so, fully expecting to become violently ill, I decided to try raw milk. And I did not become violently ill. Instead, my health began to improve, and I saw improvement within weeks. And within months, I saw significant improvement. And here I am today, crediting it, and I credit entirely to raw milk and a ketovore diet.
I love it. And so that's not even what we're here to talk about. I'm sure the people watching this are like, what the hell? But I just want to ask a couple more questions about that, and then we're going to move into the actual topic we're going to be discussing.
Yeah.
I don't suspect that your doctor had any ill will towards you. I don't suspect
think
that
so
your
at all.
doctor knew that the HPV vaccine could harm you. I suspect your doctor had nothing but good intentions for you.
I agree with that statement.
And so, what I want people watching this to understand is very, very often when somebody in a position of authority gives you advice or recommends something to you, they're not evil. They're not bad. They're not trying to destroy you or harm you. They just don't know better. Most people in modern society, they're like, well, if I need accounting advice, I ask my accountant. If I need medical advice, I ask my doctor. That's how it should be. You should be able to do that without worrying that, hey, I may be permanently disabled if I don't go in here with a lot of questions and a kind of a defiant attitude and say, well, where's the research? You shouldn't have to do that. I totally agree. But currently in modern society, very often you do need to do those things. And it's not right. It's not fair. It's not your fault, but it is your problem. And if you do not begin to take charge of your health, bad things can possibly happen. And in the same vein, if you don't start to take charge of your food and where it comes from, bad things can and will happen. And that's what we're talking about is regenerative farming, food sovereignty, decentralized food systems. Stop buying your food from the big corporations, start sourcing your food locally. And so when you healed with the raw milk, and I suspected that at the time that you thought, well, hell, I'll try raw milk, you had probably given up all hope. You're like, what could it
Yes.
hurt? I mean, I'm
Oh,
so
I was
close
on
to death.
dozens of medications.
Right. I'm so close to death. What could it hurt? The worst
Yep.
thing that could happen, it could kill me. And I mean, that might actually be a slight improvement over how you were feeling. So after you really said no, it was the raw milk, this thing that's bastardized by all mainstream media. That's the thing that actually somehow allowed my body to heal. Where did that direct you with regards to your career, your reporting, what you started looking at and focusing on, and now your current message? How did you get from recovering from POTS that was so severe you couldn't get out of bed, drank some raw milk for a while, and all of a sudden you're almost back to normal, or at least normal enough that you can actually function again? You had to be on fire. You had to be like, oh my God, this is important. This is a big deal. Where do I go from here? To walk us through your journey of how you got to where you are now.
Yes, it absolutely transformed me into a raw milk evangelist because if this had helped me, how many other people out there might this be helping? And the timing of this was interesting because right as I'm healing, the COVID vaccines are being rolled out, and I'm seeing news story after news story about other people being diagnosed with POTS. Some from COVID, but many from the vaccine itself. And so the timing of my healing was at a time when so many more, or scores more, were being injured. It was also the time that that a new crackdown on raw milk was occurring, and specifically on the farmers that I get raw milk from, the Amish. And so in my area, I'm blessed to live in an area where there are many wonderful farms that produce raw milk. And some of them were being put in the crosshairs right then and being faced with potential shutdowns. And so at a time when I have just discovered something that can help me, to then find out that the people supplying it to me are about to be closed down at a time when so many more people need it, that was unacceptable to me. And so I didn't have an option. I had to step in. I had to step in and try to do something to help these people. And so I am by nature a very curious person and a very inquisitive person. And I started to dive down that rabbit hole and find out what is going on. Why is there this anti-raw milk propaganda? Why are so many of these farms being targeted at a level that they previously were not being targeted? What is happening on a global scale? We've all seen the farmer protests in Europe. We've all seen, many of us have heard of cases like the Amos Miller case in Pennsylvania. Something is going on, and I had to get to the bottom of it. So I put in months, hundreds of hours of research, and out of it came this article series that I published at the Brownstone Institute, Children's Health Defense, and then, of course, on my own Substack. And what's happening is really disturbing. There is a coordinated global war on our farmers, and in particular on our small, independent farmers who produce safe, healthy, raw milk and pasture-raised meats. Above all, that's who they're going after.
So why do you think it's the small farmer that's being attacked by the powers that be? Why wouldn't they go after the huge food manufacturers? You may or may not know this, but 88% of the U.S. population suffers from at least one marker of metabolic disease. 88% of the U.S. population is not eating meat and eggs and drinking dairy from small independent farmers. So that's probably not the biggest problem. Why are they going after the small farmers, in your opinion?
2 words: regulatory capture. The big guys can pay for lobbyists. The lobbyists can draft legislation that benefits their client, which is the big corporations. They can then go in and cozy up to the lawmakers, arrange for donations to their campaigns, get to know them well, take them out to dinner, whatever's involved. And they can essentially buy votes to pass legislation in favor of these guys. 2, the other issue is revolving doors at the top of the regulatory agencies. So the top executives or attorneys for these mega companies can then weasel their way into the FDA, the CDC, and the USDA, and take over high-ranking positions, or people from those government positions put in their 15 years as a govie, or their 20 years, then they retire, get their government pension, and they go get their much more high-paid job over at one of these corporations. Now, guess who really wants to hire you at a high-paying job? Some corporation who you've benefited throughout your tenure in the federal or state government. If you want to be guaranteed a cushy job plus your government benefits, go benefit Monsanto, go benefit Tyson Foods, go benefit Cargill. Make sure that whatever laws and rulemaking that you do in your career benefits those guys, then finish up your time and go get paid 10 times as much working for them directly.
Yeah, sounds like a good business plan. I'm not so sure how good it is for our nation's health. So I was on the Tennessee State website. I live in rural Tennessee, and I want everybody watching this, tell me where you're at. What city, state, or country are you watching this from? And if you're not in the United States, trust me, this is a global problem. This is not just a U.S. particular problem. And if you know somebody who doesn't know that real food comes from real small farms, you could share this with them. That might help them understand. So as you go down this rabbit hole, as you say, and you start really looking into this stuff, you talked about one particular case. And in Tennessee, we're blessed to have many Amish farms, Mennonite farms, and a lot of people buy their produce from them during the season. And we all love it. But we all know that the Amish and the Mennonites are troublemakers. They love to break the law. They're just terrible rascals. I'm being sarcastic. Obviously, these people, I haven't seen a lot of news stories about, murders and robberies and rapes happening by Amish perpetrators. I don't think that's a thing. I think they're some of the most God-fearing, law-abiding citizens in the country. But there's one particular Amish farmer that the federal government seems to think is a very dangerous criminal. Walk us through that case, and it's been going on for years.
Yes.
But give
So
us a brief synopsis of that and where we're at currently with that case.
yeah. So the Amos Miller case is almost 10 years old. About 10 years ago, the I believe it was the Weston A. Price Foundation and a couple other organizations filed a Freedom of Information Act request asking for all the records that the government had on illnesses caused by raw milk and raw milk products because they claim it's so dangerous. And they also wanted the data on illnesses caused by pasteurized milk products so they could compare the two. And of course, it won't surprise most of your listeners, though it might surprise other Americans, that the cases from raw milk are a tiny, 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 tiny fraction. Cantaloupe and spinach are far more dangerous from the point of view of listeria, salmonella, and these other diseases than raw milk ever could be. So I'm not sure why we're not shutting down all the cantaloupe farms. Anyway, so at that time, what they came up with was nothing on listeria. And that's embarrassing to the government because they claim listeria is this deadly illness you get from raw milk. So you could imagine the government might have been a little incentivized, let's say, to come up with some cases of listeria-based raw milk illness. Sure enough, shortly thereafter, they claimed that an Amish farmer from Pennsylvania, Amos Miller, owner of Miller's Organic Farm, has caused 2 people to get sick from listeria. Now, if you look up Amos Miller in the mainstream news, you will find story after story after story for the last 10 years claiming that Amos Miller made people sick with listeria. One from Florida who died, that sounds terrible, and one from California. Now, that was the story until, and we're going to jump back to that, but suffice it to say that those 2 cases have been completely disproven. So Amos Miller was facing that, but they didn't manage to shut him down for the raw milk, I suspect because they knew their data was bogus. So they decided instead, you know what, if we can't shut him down on raw milk, let's go after him for his meat instead. And Amos Miller processes meat on his farm. Now, why does he do that? He'd love to be able to send it out to a butcher house, but you cannot find a butcher house that will process chicken without citric acid for sale to the public as opposed to a custom slaughter that you do yourself. And by the way, if anyone knows of one that will do that, please let me know. Amos Miller would love to hear about it. And the reason he doesn't want to use citric acid is very simple. His customers don't want it. Citric acid, you would think, is made from citrus fruit, right? Well, no. Citric acid is made from GMO corn that's been fed to black mold. It's manufactured in China. And this genetically modified black mold churns out a product that they call citric acid. It's then purified, pinky promise, totally purified by the Chinese. We trust them with all of our food stuff. And then it's shipped to the United States and sprayed on almost all meat that you buy in the grocery store to lower bacteria count. Now, I know some people eat meat raw. That's fine. But most of us are cooking it. So why are they so obsessed with lowering the bacteria count on meat that we're going to be cooking anyways? I still don't understand. But they're obsessed with it. And so the only way Amos Miller could get around putting chemicals that his customers considered poison on his meat to sell to them was to process it himself. Not one customer has ever become sick from that meat. The government has had to admit this in court. Not one customer has ever complained about this meat. The government has had to admit that in court. Doesn't matter. They came in to shut him down anyway. And when his customers tried to defend him, they brought in armed federal marshals to shut him down. When I became aware of the case and became involved, he was facing prison time, the seizure of his farm. They were trying to unconstitutionally add his wife to the case after the fact so that they could take the farm. And he was facing prison. So at that point, attorney Robert Barnes, who was, by the way, from Chattanooga, he's a Tennessee boy as well, I brought him in. I got him involved. And Robert Barnes stepped in and changed the entire case. We managed to negotiate a settlement where Amos Miller is now allowed to at least process cows and basically red meat and pork at a local USDA butcher house because we found one that would do it with organic raw apple cider vinegar, which is acceptable to at least some of his customers. But he's still unable to do chicken and poultry because of this issue, because of this citric acid black mold issue. So Amos was finally able to sell meat again. And that did not make the Department of Agriculture happy, and it did not make the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture happy. So next step was this past January, where they raided him based on a fraudulent search warrant with false statements in it. And they raided him. They seized all his food. And by seize, I mean they were too lazy to even tag each piece the way Pennsylvania law requires. They instead just slapped a label on the outside of the door. Where they were required to sign their names, they put their initials. When asked upon leaving to give their badge numbers and their names, they refused to do so. These are lawless agents from a lawless agency. And then they sued Amos. They claimed that a kid from Michigan and a kid from New York had gotten sick with E. coli. But they couldn't find E. coli in his food. That's a problem. So then they claimed they found listeria again. Now, they wouldn't say how much listeria. They wouldn't say what level, but now the supposed listeria cases from 2016 come back. So the lawsuit is full of allegations about how he killed someone in Florida and how he made someone in California sick with listeria. Well, what they didn't count on was that this legal team doesn't back down. This legal team doesn't give in easily. So some of the top whole genome sequencing experts in the world and some of the top food safety experts in the world got involved. And they dug into the government's database, and they dug and dug until they discovered two things. One, the case in Florida. The woman's family members had themselves signed an affidavit stating that she had never consumed raw milk products of any kind and that she had actually died of advanced DLBCL lymphoma. So this is very similar to the of COVID versus with COVID case. And so that's already, we've got some significant reasonable doubt at that point. She had lived in their house for about 3 weeks as she died, and they had been consuming Amos's products. But then we dug further and we found something strange. The listeria sample taken from this woman was taken months before she ever moved into their house, while she lived in a completely different state, and months before any member of her family had ever bought Amos's products or consumed them at all. So I'm a person of faith, but that's a miracle too far for me. How this person could possibly have gotten sick from Amos Miller's food when she was hundreds of miles away from her family, who had as yet never even purchased from him. And then the case in California, we found that the USDA or the CDC's own data, their own publications showed that case had been linked to a pasteurized soft cheese outbreak. And that it was a very close genetic match there, not to any sample ever collected supposedly from Amos Miller's farm. So now both of the cases that they have been able to supposedly pin on him that you will see throughout the media are complete hogwash. And if they're lying to us about this, what else are they lying to us about? And that's one of the main things I want your listeners to take away is these are agencies capable of lying, and lying on major issues, and lying for a decade until they're caught.
Yep, and I've experienced this kind of malfeasance in my own professional career with my state medical board. They're happy to make things up and stretch the truth to make a case. They love to do that. It's human nature. Regardless of what we're doing, we want to win. We want to be successful, and we're going to stretch it a little. We're gonna take some shortcuts. That's just human nature. But when the humans in question are working for the federal government, when they take a shortcut or make something up or tweak something just a little bit or just flat out lie, it has magnified ramifications that can destroy a small rancher, a small farmer, because the average rancher or farmer doesn't have the deep pockets and doesn't have the legal connections and definitely doesn't have a lobbyist and doesn't have friends at the USDA or the FDA. They don't have any of that. And so they're screwed from the outset. And that's why more and more, that's why my wife, Nisha, and I, we moved out of the city, moved out of Nashville and moved on to her grandfather's farm. And we're raising sheep now, rotation on grazing them. We got chickens. We're raising our own food, at least a large percentage of it. And I recommend everybody immediately start to look into that. Even if you live in a tiny apartment, get some quail, keep them in the closet, eat quail eggs. I don't care. You need to start raising a significant percentage of your food. And that brings up food sovereignty. what that sounds very impressive, but some people may not even understand what that means. Why? I'm sure people listening to this are freaked out by the story you just told, and they should be freaked out, but I don't want them to go away from this interview scared and worried. I want them to go away from this energized and with a plan. Here's what I'm going to do so that never happens to my local rancher. And also my family doesn't have to eat the high carb, highly processed, highly inflammatory crap that's at the grocery store. So food sovereignty, explain that.
So food sovereignty is actually a very simple concept. It's simply taking control of your own food supply. It's that simple. And if you had mentioned this to any of our great grandparents, they would have looked at us funny because, well, of course you would do that.
Sure. Why wouldn't you?
Who would ever enter the winter without an idea of what they were going to be eating until spring? Who wouldn't be raising their own food? Why? And yet we have been carefully and slowly and methodically brainwashed away from thinking that way. As Americans in the last few decades, as farming was corporatized and mechanized and sanitized and moved away from us. So one of the main things that you can do is, if you can, start to raise some of your own food. Even if you live on a tiny scrap of land or in a tiny space, you can probably still, if you have even a small piece of land and your township hasn't gotten tyrannical, you could raise chickens. If you can't raise chickens, you can raise rabbits. If you can't raise that, you could raise quail indoors, as Dr. Berry said. And if there's no way you can raise any protein, you could at least grow your own sprouts. You can at least grow your own microgreens on a windowsill. It takes no space. You can grow sprouts in a jar. But the point is, start taking steps toward taking control of some piece of your food supply. Get to know your local farmer. I can't stress that enough. Go find farmers in your area and get to know them. Ask them, what pesticides do you use? What herbicides do you use? What seasons can I get crops from you? Do you do no-till? Ask them all the questions, because you can. And if your farmers know that those things are important to you, they may pick up better practices if they aren't already doing those things. But yes,
Yep.
Get to know and defend your local farmer. And when I say defend them, I'm serious. In the area where I live, we have to actually be active in planning on how to look after our farmers because of the crackdown, and it is coming everywhere. Pennsylvania may be ahead of the curve, this dark curve on this, on this issue, but they are coming for your farmers everywhere. So get to know them, make a relationship with them now. And if you think you can't afford to eat this way, find out what your farmer needs. Many of them may need help with marketing. They may need help with other issues. You can try bartering for your labor for food, but you need to be willing to work hard, because
Absolutely.
farmers all work hard.
Absolutely. And I try to make people aware of a proper human diet, and on my other channel, and that this is a grassroots movement. This is bottom up. You're never going to change the USDA's mind or the FDA's mind. You're never going to have an impact. You can tweet on Twitter all day and share stuff on Facebook all day. You're going to have zero impact. They actually want you to waste all your time on social media yelling, because they know that's literally not going to move the needle at all. But and so what Tracy said earlier, start growing your own microgreens, get a few quail, get a few chickens. Is that going to save you? No, that's not what we're saying. But when you start doing that, even that tiny thing, growing some basil on your windowsill, that's going to make you look at the world differently. And when you start to look at the world differently, you start to think differently. And then you start to plan differently. And it'll change your entire paradigm of how you think about food and health and locally grown food versus wherever the hell it came from on that Cisco truck that came to your local supermarket. Who the heck knows where it came from? Who handled it? Who was in charge of it? Are they your friends or not? You'll never know, because very often the chain of custody of that food is hidden. Many people were surprised when I tweeted out a few months back that just because a box of meat says product of USA, that doesn't mean that meat was raised in the United States. Very often it comes from Argentina or New Zealand. It's just processed in the United States, and then they can legally say product of the USA, even though that meat was never raised by American farmers. So not only are you hurting American farmers and ranchers, you're eating a product you have no idea the chain of custody that food came through. Who touched it? Did it go through China? I don't know. Do you know? You don't know. You have no idea. And so food sovereignty, I love what you said. My grandmother was born at the end of the Great Depression. She said they were so poor they didn't even know anything had happened, right? But they had food sovereignty because they had cows and chickens and pigs, and they hunted wild game all the time and fished in the local streams. They knew where their food was. They stored it in the pasture. That's where their food was. It was stored in the hen house. It was stored in the local stream. That's where their food was stored. They had sovereignty because nobody told them, hey, you can't eat that. You can't raise that. You can't process that cow. But now and you're right, it's been so insidious over the decades that now most people think that somehow raising food is dirty or gauche, or that's what, poor dumb rednecks do. If you currently think that, you better start to rethink that, because this is going to become a big, big deal. I was on the state of Tennessee's website because I'd heard you and Chris Martinson talking about the One Health agenda. And I'm like, yeah, but Tennessee, man, that's a very common sense state, right? This is a bunch of hillbillies and rednecks running this show. I doubt, and sure enough, about 4 pages deep on the Tennessee website, tennessee.gov, the One Health agenda is on there. And initially, I didn't know what that was. I had to do a little research, but I want you to save everybody watching this the time. What is the One Health agenda? Where did it come from? And why should everybody immediately go to their state's website and see if the One Health agenda is on their state's website?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the One Health agenda was the idea behind One Health was developed in the early 2000s in response to the first SARS outbreak. And the term was used to reflect the danger that supposedly could come of new diseases developing from human-animal contact. Now, this does time correct just perfectly with when gain-of-function research began on these SARS coronaviruses, developing new diseases, but pay no attention to the virus behind that curtain. Please believe that it's entirely from human-animal contact and that all diseases come from wet markets. So that's where the term originated. And different organizations have defined it slightly differently, but I use the definition that was developed by and published by The Lancet in a 2023 editorial, where they spoke about the One Health high-level expert panel's definition of One Health as an integrated, unifying approach that aims to sustainably balance and optimize the health of people, animals, and ecosystems. That sounds great, doesn't it? I mean,
Yep.
Why wouldn't we want to do that? And that it recognizes that the health of humans, animals, plants, and the wider environment are closely linked and interdependent. All great. However, it also calls, and this you need to listen to very carefully, it calls for equity in healthcare decision-making between the impact on you personally and the impact on animals, plants, and the environment, the planet. So for your personal healthcare decisions, not just what's good for you needs to be weighed in, but what's good for animals, plants, and the planet as they define it. Anyone with half a brain should be disturbed by that, because there's nothing more sacred than the relationship between me and my doctor. There's nothing more sacred than that decision making where I should be able to trust that nothing is weighing into that decision that my doctor is making about my health than what is good for me personally. Not the payouts they're going to get from the vaccine manufacturer or anything else, right? And which is, are all things we have become aware of much more recently. But this idea of One Health as an evening of the playing field between all those parties means ultimately that your life is worth no more than that of a cockroach. And if that sounds extreme, okay, well then go back and look at the wording there. Equity. By this point, we should all be used to the word equity and what it means. And they want equity between you, animals, and the plant in healthcare decision making. And they go on to, in case anyone's still wondering, they go on to say that all life is equal and of equal concern. That's very clear wording. They go on, of course, in that same editorial to call for everybody to embrace the planetary health diet and to move away from eating animal protein. They say animal protein should be limited, red meat, to a maximum of 30 calories per day, which I think, Dr. Barry, you and I can probably say is not the diet either of us are on.
Absolutely not.
And it's one that we both know personally. Eating animal proteins and fats is probably the most revolutionarily helpful thing to our health that we have ever experienced. That's at least true for me.
Absolutely.
And so the idea that for the sake of supposed planetary health, all the right to eat animal foods should be stripped from all of us is very disturbing to anyone who's paid any attention to the health literature on this topic. They also, of course, claim that if we don't do this, there are going to be many more pandemics. Operation Bird Flu has commenced, and I do use that term advisedly. I do think it is an operation, and not. I would encourage people to look into the research on this particular strain of H5N1 that the USDA has been doing at their Sperl laboratory in Athens, Georgia, and whether you think the arrival of this supposed pandemic is a coincidence given that. So, beyond that, though, we know that at this point that most of the people who are the elites in our society believe there are too many people on this planet. They have a very Malthusian view. And I personally am not interested in having Malthusians mandating that the health of the planet should be weighed up next to my own health when making decisions for my life. And if you want to look at see where this could go, look no further than Canada, where they have the MAID program, Medical Assistance in Dying. It's a great euphemism. And when this program was instituted, people were told, look, this is compassionate care for people who are dying of terminal illnesses, who may be suffering horribly and just want to end their suffering slightly sooner. But since that time, the slippery slope has gotten a lot more slippery. And you have people who are applying for help. Even in some cases, it's applying for welfare and being denied but offered medical assistance in dying instead. There is a famous case of Christine Gauthier, who is a Paralympic athlete and military veteran in Canada. And so she's incredibly healthy and an incredible athlete, with the exception of being paralyzed from the waist down. And she applied to their to their socialized healthcare system up there for help buying a new wheelchair lift. And she was denied. But she was told, ma'am, if you are so desperate for that, what we could offer you is medical assistance in dying. And so you can see that this is very disturbing, and it's happening just to our north. And it's not hard to guess that a medical body that is making decisions about your health based on what is best for the planet or even society might make decisions that look a lot more like the decision made for Christine Gauthier than it did for the rest of us. And Christine, bless her heart, stood up and did not go along with them, and she outed what they were doing. She took her letter to the Canadian Parliament and blew the case wide open. But far more people are giving in and allowing themselves to be killed when they cannot get the medical care that they need. And so when you know that's happening in civilized, developed countries just to our north, and you see this agenda being put in place all over the world, it should really raise your eyebrows. In addition, there is the consideration that they like to talk about of food prescriptions. Let your food be your medicine, which is a statement that I certainly agree with, and I'm sure you, Dr. Barry, also agree with.
Sure.
But they don't mean it the way we do. In order to understand that, you have to look at what they're removing from the food supply, and you have to look at what they're adding to the food supply. What are they removing from the food supply? Well, if you look at the C40 Cities agenda, which is an agenda, it's the same folks who are behind the 15-minute cities agenda. And many cities across the U.S. have signed up for this. I know Seattle, Philadelphia, Houston, New York, Los Angeles, many others have already signed up. And the idea is that for those cities, they are going to cut their food carbon footprint by 33%. They are actively tracking what the residents purchase. Credit card companies are turning that data over. American Express is an open partner in that project. And they are committing to cutting the carbon emissions from the food their residents are eating. Okay, so that's a problem. We know, and they specifically say that these these emissions are coming from beef, red meat of all kinds, poultry, eggs, and fish. Remove all of that. What are you left with? Insects for protein? Beans, if your stomach can handle them.
Right.
And so when you're considering the One Health agenda food prescriptions, look very carefully at what they're removing, and then you need to look at what they're adding, of course, too. We've got DARPA, the military defense, the Advanced Research Projects Agency, spending millions of dollars to try to develop plastic protein powder made from military plastic waste that bacteria eat, and that would be designed for being fed to humans. We have fake proteins that taste sweet that are being developed. We have bacterial barcode spores for traceability being sprayed on food in the field. Your food doesn't have to be labeled. That's a product called BioTrack, I believe, by Annika Biosciences. You can find it in my article series on my Substack. So all of these things that are being added to the food supply and all these things that are being removed should give you a lot of pause when they say that they would be writing grocery store prescriptions. And so unless you want your cricket powder and your vaccine lettuce, we can get into that as well, but unless you want those becoming mandatory, you need to make a relationship with your local farmer now and develop your local food supply now. Develop your food sovereignty now. Because if you wait until you need it, it's too late.
Oh, I totally agree. And let me just, we're going to talk about specific steps that any person, any family can start to take right now, today. You can start today to develop a food sovereignty plan for yourself and for the people you love. But I just want to add to what you said. Anytime you hear, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that at the federal government level, it uniformly benefits multi-billion-dollar corporations.
Exactly.
When's the last time you heard a news agency, a press release that, oh, the federal government is going to do this thing, and it's going to literally directly help small businesses or small farmers, small ranchers, or just people other than helicopter money when they just send you a check from the federal government? When's the last time you heard that press release? Because I'm thinking, and I can't remember one, where it's like, oh, it's going to make it easier for us to grow our own food. It's going to make it easier, well, actually more profitable for us to have a small farm, for us to, have our own food sovereignty. It's in every single case, what it winds up being is what they're proposing is scalable. What does that mean? That means that a huge billion-dollar corporation can take cricket powder or pea protein or something that a bacteria is manufactured. They can make this in huge factories, and very often the manufacturing products, what they're starting with, the ingredients, are subsidized by the federal government, like grains, like sugar, like seed oils. And that they're going to scale that up, and the big corporation's going to wind up making a 10,000% markup. And so they've got room in their budget to pay lobbyists and to pay advertisers for advertisements. And it's also always shelf stable, Tracy. Every single time you can make it in China, put it on a cargo ship, bring it to America. It can sit in the warehouse for 6 months, then it can sit on the supermarket shelf for another month or two, and it's still just like it was just made. It hasn't changed at all because bacteria and fungus refuse to eat it because it's not real food.
Exactly.
In no case has the federal government came out and said, "Hey, we're gonna make nutrient dense meat more available. We're gonna increase the number of processors so that local farmers and ranchers can take their produce and get it processed so that people can have a local supply of food." You never hear that, do you?
No.
And I find that very telling. And I think that if anybody thinks that through for a second, it's like, okay, so, and then I would like to remind everybody what the definition of fascism is, because we hear the derogatory term fascist thrown around a lot. But what that actually means is when big government and big corporations work hand in hand. That is, if you look it up on Webster.com, that's the literal definition of fascism.
You can almost call it a public-private partnership.
Oh, yeah, right. That's another way of describing it. And so people need to really understand what that term means. And when you understand what it means, and then you start thinking about what I just said, you're like, oh, crap. That's probably bad. Yes, it is uniformly bad. Now let's turn our attention, Tracy, to doing what you do and I try to do. Let's help people. Somebody's watching this and they're like, their cortisol level is now high. Their heart rate is now elevated. They're like, this sounds really bad. I wish that I knew what to do about this.
Right.
All right, here you go. Here's what you can start to do about this today. Tracy has a list. She's got it in several of her articles on her Substack. Let's go through the list. What can somebody who's freaked out right now, what can they start to do today, tomorrow, and next week to protect their family from what is very, very likely coming?
That's a great question. And I would say, first of all, believe that there's something you can do. The minute you believe you have lost, you have. As long as you know you can do something, you're still in the game.
Yep.
So don't for a moment believe there's nothing you can do. If you have $10, if you have, $10, $20, you can buy a sprout jar. That's any mason jar and then a sprouting lid. You can go get organic seeds. Places like True Leaf Market sell them. You can probably find them in your local Home Depot too. And then you can grow your own sprouts. You can grow those any time of year. You don't even need sunlight to grow those. You just need a little, you can find a basic guide online on how to grow sprouts. So that's the absolute cheapest thing. If you want, and you can grow those in 3-4 days, 5 days. And they're, if you are a vegetable eater, they are delicious. They're nutritious. And they're as good as lettuce you'd get at the grocery store. Better. Honestly.
Yeah, better. Yep.
And then if you want something that's a little more like lettuce, you can upgrade a little bit. You can grow microgreens. It's basically the same concept, but instead of in a sprouting jar, you're growing it in a little pan of dirt. And I grew those during the pandemic. And you may have seen microgreens in a high-end restaurant when they bring you a dish and there's these beautiful little tiny lettuce leaves on it. That's microgreens. You can have what the high-end restaurant gave you a tiny bit of. You can have an entire salad of those every day just by buying growing a few trays of this. You either need to set it in a sunny spot or you need to get a little grow light. But again, you can do this for not much money at all. If you have local farms and you have the ability to get yourself a freezer, you can buy food while it's in season and store it up for the winter. I strongly recommend people do that. And you can... Either way, I would strongly recommend that you abandon the grocery store. Stop eating processed foods. They're poisonous. They're becoming more poisonous. They're going to cost you a tremendous amount of money in the long run in health problems. Take it from somebody who was disabled for more than a decade. It's extremely expensive, spiritually, mentally, and financially, to be disabled. And you will be if you keep eating the standard American diet, the SAD diet.
Disabled or dead. That's your two options. And in many cases, being dead is preferable because the disabled part is it's not fun. It's not pleasant at all. And I've been telling patients for over 20 years now, there are much worse things that can happen to you than death.
Amen to that. Amen to that. A slow, hard death or being stuck in health purgatory is far worse.
Yes.
So you might be thinking, well, there's probably some farms in my area, but where would I even go to find them? If you go to the Weston A. Price, and again, if you want to see a succinct list of all of these because you don't have time to take notes right now, go to my Substack and go to the most recent article posted, and you will see a list of all of these. I have links in there to all the sites I'm about to mention. If you want to find a raw milk farm.
I'm going to have Tracy's Substack linked. If it's not already linked during the live, I'm going to link it as soon as the live's over so that you guys can come back and check on the links.
Excellent. Yeah, so you can go to getrawmilk.com to find local raw milk farms. And even if they aren't any right in your area, you may find some that have drop sites in your area. The way this works is enough people in your area have decided to buy that the farm has set up a drop site where they come once a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month, whatever it is, and they drop off coolers of food. And it's a fantastic system. And you can find farms on farmmatch.com. You can find them on localharvest.org. And you can find them on the Weston A. Price Foundation by going there, finding your local chapter. They'll list the chapter leaders' contact information. Just email them and say, hey, I'm local to you. Do you have a list of local farms you recommend supporting?
Yep.
So those are
And you
all
guys
ways you
can
can
go
find
back and rewatch this if you need to write those down. You can just go back and rewatch and write them all down, look them all up, bookmark them all, and start using them.
Yes, I highly recommend it. And then you can, I would really recommend building a parallel society of like-minded people now. Harder times are coming.
Now,
We're not heading back to a pre-2020 time anytime soon. Things are going to get tougher, and when things get tough, you need your people, you need your crew, you need people that you trust. And if you wait until times are so bad that you need them, it's too late. You have to build those trust relationships now. If you're considering relocating to a place that's better, do it sooner rather than later, because if you're the new guy in town that nobody knows, nobody's going to be helping you. You need to form those deep personal relationships before you actually need them. And
absolutely.
and then I also recommend, if you're going to transact with your local farmer, do it in cash or do it in an alternate currency.
Yes.
CBDCs are coming. The One Health agenda is part of that same control grid, because if you think again about the idea that anything that impacts the health of the planet is a healthcare decision, well, then anyone who governs that can govern anything you do that impacts the health of the planet. That would include what you buy, where you go, where you travel, what work you do, and certainly what you eat. And so
Yep.
if you want to be able to make those decisions independently without being told, sorry, your CBDC wallet has used up its red meat allotment for the year in the first week. If you don't want that conversation, then you need to get those relationships with farmers and find ways of buying that do not involve your credit card, if at all possible.
Totally agree. Cash, Bitcoin, or pre 65 silver US coins. When I was practicing full time at the Berry Clinic for years, you could have a doctor's visit for $3.50 in pre 1965 silver coins. And I probably had 10 guys who they didn't have health insurance for whatever reason, and they would bring $3.50 in pre 65 silver coins, US coins. And that's how they paid for their office visit. And so I got to report to the IRS that I'd been paid $3.50 because that's still legal tender, right? And of course, that I didn't put that in the bank. I took that home. But pay your local farmer in cash, in pre-65 silver, in Bitcoin. That may not seem important right now. But what Tracy's talking about, that the big dogs, the people that you don't even know their name, the guys you've never met, the guys who could care less if you live or die, they've got big plans for currency in the future. And I don't talk about this a lot, but I keep a very close eye on these developments. And Tracy's exactly right. The minute that they think it's politically viable to bring in a central bank digital currency, they will do it immediately, and they will then be able to track literally every single thing you do. So the tracking, that's a big deal. But also, what Tracy alluded to, they'll be able to turn it off and be like, "Oh, you've already had your 30 grams of red meat for the day. You can't buy anymore."
Right.
Yeah, that things like that are possibly coming. That's why it's so important to start to develop your local food sources right now. And I love your microgreens idea. I've done that at home before. It's super simple. And for those of you who follow my health advice, don't eat the seeds, sprout the seeds, because when you sprout the seeds, you drastically decrease the amount of oxalates, lectins, phytates, and other anti-nutrients. But then the plant is basically defenseless at that point when it's sprouted from a seed into a sprout. And so it also unlocks a lot of the nutrition that, although it's in the seed, your body can't access it. But once you sprout that, that's a different thing. I love quail. I've had quail here for years. I have them in a tiny little outbuilding, but somebody who currently living in the suburbs, you're on a tenth of an acre. Do you have a garage? You could literally feed your family on quail eggs and quail meat.
Right. And you can raise rabbit in there if for some reason you don't
100%.
like quail.
Yes, and none of your neighbors would ever be the wiser unless you invited them over, because they don't make any noise to speak of. In some places, you could have a few hens in the backyard, and then you've got fresh eggs. Not only fresh eggs, but actual organic eggs where the chickens ate bugs in it and worms and grass seeds, like chickens are supposed to do. That's going to make the egg much more nutritious. If you have more land, then definitely look into more chickens, look into sheep, look into cattle if you've got a bigger spot, not only for yourself and your family. I guarantee you're going to have a neighbor's like, hey, what would you charge me? And now guess what you just did? You're actually part of the solution now. You're no longer part of the problem, because when you go to the supermarket and you spend your $10 on Kellogg's or Kraft Heinz or Mondelez, not only are you starving your local farmers and ranchers, but you're literally giving the big food manufacturers money for their lobbyists. You're literally part of the problem. And so if you do, and many of us have to shop at the supermarket, you can't scale this up overnight, but stick to the outer aisles. Buy real food. Don't go in the center of the supermarket. That's where big food makes their money.
Right. And if you can, find a local farmer's market. I think that you're still better off buying a low spray, low chemical product from your neighbor's garden
Absolutely.
than you are buying almost anything in the supermarket.
Absolutely.
And then you can create your own seed vault of heirloom seeds that you can then in the future give to other people if needed. That's a super cheap way to help.
Absolutely.
And and again, Dr. Barry and I can both tell you we've taken a resilience journey, but we didn't take it overnight. We didn't. Neither of us started this and went from living in a tightly urban or suburban area to having sheep overnight. It didn't happen. But you can, if you do have a good skill set, something that a farmer might need. I know people that do electrical work and trade it for half a beef. Buy themselves a freezer, stick that half beef in there, and they're good for quite a while, even if they're carnivore.
Absolutely.
So there's all sorts of things that you can do, especially if you have a trade skill that you could trade with a farmer for food.
Yes.
And you don't have, let's say you don't have a freezer. Okay, well then see if you can trade it for a food credit that they keep on file at the farm for you.
There's always a way. You just have to think.
Yep. And then another thing to be aware of is that if something is an industry standard, it does not have to be listed on the food packaging. So you will not see the chemicals that your meat is washed with listed on your food packaging. They don't do that because it's an industry standard. So there's a lot of stuff, or your eggs. A lot of those eggs are washed in bleach or peracetic acid, and then they're coated in seed oil to keep them, because now that they've been washed, they're porous. So they coat them in seed oil. That seed oil soaks into the egg. So even if you think you're getting away with not eating seed oil, but you're eating eggs from the supermarket, you may be eating seed oils that have absorbed into the egg. Find a local farmer or get your own eggs. Find a neighbor that raises them. Buy unwashed eggs, eat them that way. I would prefer an egg that had poop on it over an egg that has seed oil on it.
100%. 100%. Every egg we bring in out of the hen house has got a little bit of chicken poop because it comes out of a chicken's butt. Cloaca, actually, but it's the chicken's butt. And so there's probably going to be some poop on there. I care not. Bonnie and Beckett, Bonnie's 2, Beckett's 4, they go get the eggs, chicken poop. It's like, yeah, okay, fine. I don't care, because we've been doing that, I don't know, for hundreds of thousands of years. We've been collecting eggs that came out of a bird's cloaca. That's not a new thing for humans to be exposed to. That's kind of natural and normal. What about county government, state government, local parish government? How can we, as just individuals, how can we start to make our local governments aware, or make sure they're aware, or start to harden our local communities against the onslaught that at some point is going to come for us? What can we do locally?
Great question. One thing that many people overlook is the role of constitutional sheriffs.
Yes.
If you have constitutional sheriffs still in your state, Pennsylvania does not. We should, but our state does not recognize them. But if you do still, find out if your local sheriff considers themselves to be a constitutional sheriff and ask them outright, what do you do to support the farms in our area? If one of our farms is getting raided by an agency, are you going to step in and protect them? Find out the Sheriff Max organization has had many sheriffs who have done this. The state or a federal agency shows up, tries to raid these farms, and the local sheriff comes out and says, look, sir, your agents can feel free to do this, and they will spend a night in my jail because this is an unconstitutional action. Your rules may allow it, the Constitution doesn't, and I am the chief law enforcement officer for this county, So I would recommend you get back in your car and you leave. And they do. Guess what? They're not interested in spending a night in jail. They get back in their car and they leave. And there was a Supreme Court case that Sheriff Mack was involved in that confirmed that this is indeed the constitutional role for sheriffs. You're welcome to do a deep dive on that. But if you have a local constitutional sheriff, a lot of these guys, by the way, did a ton to protect people during COVID too, because they just refused to enforce the unconstitutional COVID mandates against people going into supermarkets without masks on their face, for instance, or against having a gathering in your backyard. If your constitutional sheriff decided that wasn't being enforced, guess what? You could have that gathering. The next county over, they couldn't because their sheriff was a wuss. So find out if your sheriff is a constitutional sheriff, whether he respects these rules, and if he doesn't, find someone to primary him. Get rid of him and get one that does. This is one of the fastest, quickest ways that you can massively improve the freedom-mindedness and the freedom safety of your county.
I love that. I love that. So instead of, over the coming weeks and months, instead of spending hours a day retweeting stuff and sharing stuff on Facebook about the national politics and the federal elections, find out, do you have a constitutional sheriff? Does your sheriff even know what that means? Does he or she know what that implies? If not, begin to teach them. And if they refuse to learn, then you start looking for a candidate and supporting that candidate. You see how that when you're spending your time doing that, you're actually making a definite difference in the safety of yourself, your family, and your community. Whereas if you're retweeting stuff about Kamala or Donald, you're literally wasting your time and everybody else's. Focus on your local politics, because that's where you can make a meaningful, perhaps life and death difference in your own community.
Exactly. Well said. Yeah, I mean it's shocking how big of a difference it really can make. But I've seen, I have a friend who was facing being jailed for refusing to turn over the list of farmers who were selling raw milk to his co-op, his food co-op, and his local sheriff refused to deliver the papers. His local sheriff said, if you're arrested in the courtroom and they bring you to my local jail, you can walk right out. They couldn't go after him. And because they couldn't go after him and lock him up, they couldn't get him to turn over the list of his farmers, and his farmers remained safe as a result. So this really is a big deal, and it does truly help. Otherwise, become involved locally. I can't stress that enough. Do you have a local Department of Health? Start sitting in on their meetings. Find out what little plots they have for your area. Find out what they're planning. And definitely get to know your farmers. Let them know you are on a list of people that they can call if they start to get in trouble. And then find more. Because what has kept Amos Miller going, where other farmers failed, was a huge list of customers who are deeply loyal to him, who depend on his food, and who will do anything to support him. There was a hearing in his case back in March, and the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people showed up. The courtroom seated 47 people. People didn't care. They still showed up. They filled all the hallways. They stood outside. It was wild. And if you think for a minute judges don't notice that, they do. If you think for a minute that the health authorities don't notice that, they do.
Absolutely. And that kind of quiet yet powerful response, that's definitely noticed. That's definitely, that moves the needle. And again, that's a local thing that you can do.
Yes.
That actually makes a difference. Tracy Thurman, this has been amazing. For those of you watching, please consider sharing this, because it could literally make the difference in somebody you know's life. I'm going to put all the links. Tracy, if you'll send me the Supreme Court case about the constitutional sheriff, I will also link that in the show notes. If any of you guys, if you're like, what is a constitutional sheriff? What does that even mean? It's a big deal. You need to know what that means. You can do an internet search and you can read for a minute and you're like, oh my God, I had no idea. I never learned that in school. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff you didn't learn in school. So keep learning, stay engaged, stay informed, and act locally, shop locally, eat locally, grow as much of your own as you can, and then help your local farmer and your local rancher. Tracy Thurman, where can people find you if they want to learn more?
Follow me on Substack at tracythurman.substack.com. All my articles there are free. I'm giving this information away because I want you to know about it, and I want you to be able to share it with other people without having to pay for it. You can also, to see an up-to-date list of the topics that I'm exploring and the issues that I'm paying attention to, follow me on X at Tracy A. Thurman, TracyAThurman. And I'm active on there to the degree that I'm willing to be without giving up my my time solving problems in the real world. So those are the two places I recommend people find me. And otherwise, you can see my articles on Children's Health Defense and on the Brownstone Institute.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Tracy. This has been amazing. Thanks everybody for watching and for sharing this, because it's very important. We may have to do hour 2 of this in the near future. Tracy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Berry. It's a pleasure.
Bye-bye.